I am really motivated to make a difference. Like, I think about what people will say when I'm no longer here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Drake, and this is Who's Missing. Are you missing a veterinarian in your community? Are you missing someone who has a huge heart and a brilliant mind for ecology and conservation and how zoos specifically fit into that conversation? Well, today we have an incredible guest. I'm so excited for you to hear what she has to say. Dr. Hayley Murphy. She is a veterinarian by training, and she is a leader by development over time. She's the executive director and CEO of the Detroit Zoo. And we talk about so many things, not the least of which is life and death. So if you're feeling like you're in the mood for that conversation and a pragmatic way to think about it that couples with compassion and really had me thinking, it's powerful to hear what Dr. Murphy has to say about the importance of honoring endings, reconnecting with the environment, and what people get wrong about zoos. She is a passionate person and a really passionate guest on the show, and I was so grateful to have her. So I hope you enjoy Dr. Hayley Murphy. The CEO of the Detroit Zoological Society, you have to pay attention to the seasons, right? I was thinking, what animals are morning animals? What animals are evening animals?
Yeah.
How do you think professionally in terms of seasons? How does that affect the zoo or the animals? Or just talk to me about, because so many of us in our jobs are disconnected from the seasons.
Seasonality is incredibly important for animals and for humans. We just don't give it the intentional credit that we should, right? I mean, just look at the evidence behind seasonal affective disorder and things like that. It is an important thing. Light cycles are important. Melatonin, sleep cycles, all of the things that we tend to just not focus on as a human race in the rat race that we live in. So certainly at the zoo, we are very intentional about seasonality. And there's so many factors that go into that. From what animals we decide to have at the zoo. Obviously, we're a conservation and education mission-driven organization, but just as important is our animal welfare. And so would it be fair to have a polar bear in the southern hemisphere? That's really hard to do. It can be done. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it takes a lot more life support than it does to have a polar bear in Detroit or, a northern zoo. So we look at our animal population through that lens, what makes the most sense. And then we also look at, are these animals nocturnal? Are they diurnal? When would we be in their comfort zone versus vice versa? So seasonality is huge.
Yeah. I remember talking to, I think it was the CEO of the Lincoln Park Zoo right when COVID started about, how can the zoo be a part of the collective kind of healing that we're going through right now? Which I think as one of the great outdoor spaces, it's a place where a lot of people, and I just want to hear your thoughts on this, a lot of people I would imagine would feel safe. What was your journey as a leader through, leading through COVID and then leading through, I guess, the healing after COVID and the role you guys play?
Yeah, COVID certainly, it took a toll on everybody, whether that was emotional, physical, financial, all organizations. But coming out of that kind of shelter in place, being hit by a pandemic like that, I think we saw the beauty of places like the zoo. We saw that people needed that kind of open air space to reconnect, not only with nature, but with each other in a way that didn't feel threatening. I think it became even more of a powerful incentivizer, maybe is the right word, to get out and to come to a place like the zoo, because not only are you in nature, but you're seeing nature at its finest.
Yeah. You had me thinking, has Hayley ever wanted to, if she couldn't do, well, you're right here, I'll just speak to you as in first person. If you couldn't do what you're doing, is there anything else you'd want to do?
Oh, boy. Nobody's ever asked me that. You know, I never wanted to do anything. As long as I could ever remember, I wanted to be a veterinarian. Like, I never, ever thought of anything else. But over time, I realized that I really love working with people and mission and strategy. So if I had to do anything else, I guess I'm doing it. Like, I've morphed into this.
Well, and it occurs to me too, you know, I was talking to another leader this morning who's on the cusp of turning 50, and he's having this experience of what mattered to him isn't mattering as much now. How has what motivates you changed in this season of your career?
I am really motivated to make a difference. Like, I think about what people will say when I'm no longer here.
Yeah.
And I hope that they say that I was a kind person, that I had empathy for people, and a good mother. You know, I've got 2 kids, and you know, all the things that are super important to most people are also super important to me. But I hope that they say that I left the Detroit Zoological Society in a better place, that the impact on the environment, because just turn on the news. I mean, we are living in a time of major shifts right now. Politically, religiously, environmentally, whatever, pandemic, you know, we have got some major shifts happening. And so I think now is the time for leaders to stand up and say, listen, if we don't change this trajectory, if we don't change what's happening on the globe, we're in real trouble. So I hope that I could play a role in that. I hope the DZS will play a role in that, the Detroit Zoo. Yeah, I think that's changed a lot for me. I didn't have that bigger global vision when I started out.
Do you see, just for people in general, as zoos being the gateway to appreciating the environment, to connecting with an issue that for a lot of people we're not thinking about, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely can serve that purpose for multiple reasons. You know, zoos are usually, not always, but usually in urban environments. They're green spots, right? They're spots where there's an intentionality around nature and animals. So many people who live, especially in inner cities, they might not have the opportunity to see, in our case, over 120 acres of green space. They may not have the opportunity to appreciate what a giraffe smells like. We definitely can be a gateway if people choose to have that experience. We can also just be a fun place to come relax with your family.
Yeah, so, you know, I think about legacy too. You were talking about legacy just a minute ago. Your desire to have left the zoo and left your family and left life, you know, better than you found it. When I talk about things like legacy with leaders, and, you know, David Brooks has this great book where he talks about eulogy virtues versus resume virtues, right? So, like, what do you want? And the eulogy exercise, when I was practicing clinically, was a pretty common one. Like, what do you want people to say? So my experience with human beings, mammals, we are mammals, right, is like, we don't want to really think about that very much, you know? And I'm just wondering, having such a front seat to the life cycle of an animal, how it's affected your thoughts on kind of life and death and the circle of life, and talking about it as a human.
For me, and certainly I'm not going to say I'm looking forward to the day that I die or anybody close to me dies, but for me it's kind of a more clinical, like, I understand life and I understand death and I understand what happens physiologically, psychologically, as much as we can know. So I think, at least for me personally, not that I'm detached from it, it certainly affects me, and I mourn animals like I mourn people, but I think I approach it from more of a science background. And with animals, they also don't anticipate things. And so we as humans anticipate. Animals don't know enough to anticipate. I mean, they certainly anticipate, oh, it's dinner time, and oh, my favorite human's coming at 5 o'clock because they come through the door every day at 5 o'clock, and that's really exciting. But they don't anticipate, oh, I've got something really wrong with me, and it's probably not going to be survivable. And so I think we have to be very careful about putting our emotions onto animals, because they're different. One of my pet peeves that people ask all the time, and I'll just say it, is, I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I love animals too much to do it. And I'm like, well, what do you think veterinarians, why? I mean, we go into it because we love animals.
Yeah.
It's very hard. It's a very hard career. There's a whole social movement called Not One More, because there's so much suicide in the veterinary profession. And so that's just a pet peeve around death, that people say, I could never euthanize an animal. For me anyway, that's a gift, to give an animal a painless death when they're suffering.
What do people get wrong about you, and what do people get wrong about zoos?
I'll start with zoos first, because that's easier.
It sure is.
Yeah. I think with zoos, there's so many misconceptions about zoos.
Yeah, I know.
I think that there's a certain percentage of the population that will never agree with zoos. They will never agree with animals and I'm doing a quotation mark sign, in captivity. Yep. But the facts are, for people that love the zoo for what we do, from nature space all the way up to our education, to our science, to our conservation, is that we don't go out and capture animals in the wild anymore. We don't put them in horrible, at least for AZA, for accredited zoos. Now, there's many zoos out there. I'm not talking about everybody. I'm talking about the AZA accredited zoos,
right,
which is a kind of the gold standard for zoos and aquariums. We don't put them in small little hovels and beat them with wet spaghetti, whatever people think we do. We spend a ton of time on enrichment and training and making the habitats as wonderful as we can, where we have science behind our welfare. We're looking at stress markers. Yeah. We're constantly trying to address the quality of life for our animals. I just had this discussion this morning about stress. I was like, God, I wish my stress levels were dealt with as effectively as we deal with the animals. Besides just money going to conservation work, if you look at the impact we can make on the millions and millions of people that come through the gate, more people come through the gate of zoos and aquariums in the U.S. than they do major sporting events. Wow. So if we can change the conversation with those people, if they can listen to an educator or talk to an animal caretaker, or even just, like I said before, smell a giraffe, or listen to a gorilla beat his chest, or see frogs in a habitat and learn about the amphibian crisis that's going on, then we've made a difference, and that difference can be amplified through every visitor and every staff member. So that's incredibly important. So I would encourage people to try it. Come to the zoo. Go to your local zoo if you're listening from outside Detroit, and experience it.
Well, and experience it, I think, Hayley, with the new eyes that you're giving people, right? Like, you're not just looking around the zoo and looking like, oh man, the lion's not out today, which might be the case. We'll see. Everyone wants to see the lion. But to look at how it's designed, to talk to the employees, to see who works there and why they work there. There's so many different ways to interact with it. I want to give you a little space. First of all, I have not forgotten that I asked you, what do people get wrong about you personally, madame, as a leader, or just as a woman, or what do you think people get wrong? You're an empathic person. Sometimes people with empathy, I don't know, people get some things wrong about them, but maybe that's not where you want to go with this. I don't know.
I've never asked somebody, what do you think about me? So I don't know what I know that I have a coach. I have an executive coach who I've had for a while. And, some advice she gave me when I was thinking of transitioning to this role was, you tend to sit back and you listen, you take everything in, and but when you speak, like you've really listened. And she said, and that might hurt you during the interview process because you're not going to be emotive. You're more contemplative. And I think that people maybe misjudge me sometimes. They think, oh, she's just either being snobby or reserved or, a wallflower, where I'm really just trying to process everything before I say anything.
Yeah. And the reason I asked that question is exactly so people who identify as, an intentional extrovert know that other people identify as that too, because culturally, we love people who are out front, loud, and direct. We just love it. We think that that's what leaders look like. And that's another thing that I'm really passionate about is, highlighting all the different types of leaders. I mean, you are by all measures a successful leader. You are at the top of your profession and you are influencing, and you did that by being you. So other people can do that too. And so that's me on my soapbox. Let me put you back on your soapbox as we round the bend here. I want to give you some space if there's anything else you want to say about the zoo, or if you want to say anything about the Great Ape Heart Project, if listeners want to engage with that for any reason. Because the first thing I thought of, and I was doing some research before this, I was like, heart disease in apes, like, of course, right?
Yeah.
Like, of course. So anything you want to share about that?
We started the project because they do get heart disease, and humans are part of the Great Ape taxonomic group, and we get heart disease. So we started that project many years ago, really to look at what's even normal for a great ape. What's normal for an EKG, what's normal for an echo or ultrasound of the heart. We didn't really have a lot of data on that. So we started out just as a fact-finding group. And so it's just kind of morphed over the years into this great, I always call it we're the hub of a wheel. By we, I mean there's a ton of volunteer, both veterinarians and MD cardiologists and geneticists and pathologists and nutritionists and animal caretakers who really love those animals and help us out with training to get some of this data. So we get the data in, and then we analyze it, and we then feed the information back out to veterinarians to help them. So yeah, I'm very passionate about it. It's a great project.
Yeah.
And it also is a project that we've used to inspire other projects like it to look at data across zoo species. So it definitely has a bigger impact. And as far as the zoo, I mean, it's a phenomenal organization. We really lead in animal welfare and animal care and conservation. We have an incredibly impactful education department and beautiful grounds. I mean, not only if you love animals, but we've got beautiful gardens and landscaping and play spaces. It's just a fun place to be. It makes me smile.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'm sure you've converted a number of people. I feel like everyone I know that lives in Southeast Michigan goes to the zoo. But just in case there's an isolated variable here, get thee to the zoo.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Yes,
well, with me, Christina's a
really
silent
fun.
partner. It was so fun. Okay, here we go. 3 takeaways from my conversation with Dr. Murphy. Have you thought about zoos like this? I mean, have you thought about the role that they play? I think that they help us reconnect with the environment is pretty powerful, not to mention fellow human beings and in sort of a safe and interesting way. Another thing I took away is how useful it is to think about how you want to be remembered. When you're no longer here, in that answer is where you can find your values. And we call them, in this episode, eulogy virtues, referencing David Brooks's terminology. And then finally, take your individual strengths and harness them instead of fighting them. Fighting them is exhausting. So instead of going with what you're supposed to, should do, could do, ought to do, go with what you are, right? In whatever role you're in. And that's how you find satisfaction. So I know you had takeaways too. We'd love to hear what they are. And thanks for listening. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Chicago Zoological Society. My first job was at Brookfield Zoo, which is just outside Chicago and is part of the Chicago Zoological Society. And I still remember making $4.25 an hour as a seasonal zookeeper. And zoos have always been something somewhere that I can go and get access to information and education I couldn't anywhere else. Chicago Zoological Society itself is really all about animal care and compassion and education and inspiring conservation leadership. And that's what it's all about, is conservation and protection, and education and connection. I could go on. Have you been to the zoo? When's the last time you went? And can you go with fresh eyes and experience it differently and tell your friends about it? Chicago Zoological Society, you can find them at czs.org. That's C, Z as in zebra, S as in Sam.org. Enjoy.